If you go to a play, nobody remembers all of Hamlet. But some lines you remember, right? You find a line in there that's beautiful. Someone gives you a great poem. You don't remember the whole poem, but there was one line that stuck out. And you might be stopped in your tracks with that line. Don't look at it yet, because I want to give you the introduction, so I need you to pay attention still, please. I go to pray like you go to pray. It's true I know a lot more about it, no question. But when I'm praying, I'm not the scholar. I'm just like you. And I suspend my disbelief, and I sing along, and I read along. And I let my mind wander, and I try to enter this atmosphere of an hour or two, when who knows, all things are possible. And when I can at least feel at home with all these other Jews. And in addition, I've tried to find one line. That's all you need. One line of a poem, one line of a play, one line of a great novel, and make that your line. And as you go through life, different lines occur to you. We are going to look now at a prayer you know, called Adon Olam. And I'm going to show you how it works, okay? First, we're going to look at the prayer more deeply so you'll appreciate it more. And secondly, I'm going to show you what it means to find a line. So, can I have a copy, please? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I sort of know it by heart. But. Okay, you all know Adon Olam. You also know that you always sing it. This is one of those prayers everybody always sings. Nobody ever reads it. This is good and bad. It's bad because that means you never pay attention to the words. It's also bad because it usually attracts a kind of upbeat melody that you could sing almost anything to. Your cantor will take those melodies and sing anything in the world to it, or she'll set any melody to it. It's one of those things, right? We're going to pretend there's no melody at the moment, and I'm going to read through with you. We're just going to look at the English, though, okay? See it at the bottom? You probably never even paid any attention to the English altogether. Take a look at it. This is a profound poem that was written in the Middle Ages. We don't know who the author is. But it was written at a period of time when Jews were studying philosophy, like Maimonides, that kind of thing, you know, during the Middle Ages, possibly in the Golden Age of Spain. So it begins very philosophically. And so let's take a look at what this author has to say about God. All right, with me? You are our eternal God, who reigned before any being had been created. So you think for a minute, God's eternal. Now, that in itself should floor you, because I don't know what eternal is. I mean, I sort of know what it means, but I can't imagine it. Eternal? Meaning before time? Time doesn't enter into the universe until the Big Bang. So there was a time before time, yes. And someday, maybe time will be gone, somehow. But somehow, God is whatever it is that was before time and after time and still is, something eternal. So that's the first claim. And since God, we call God a king, a ruler, when all was done according to your will, then you were called ruler. God can't be a ruler unless there's someone to say, hello, ruler. I mean, if you don't rule anybody, you're not a ruler. So now you see, that's interesting. As much as we need God, God needs us. Because otherwise, there's no one to rule. So we see that God creates people, so we have a relationship. And after all ceases to be, you alone will rule in majesty, because God's eternal, right? You have been, you are yet, you are now, and you will be in glory. There's something about God that is what's ever left of the universe when the universe is gone. Whatever that eternal thing is, now I'm way out of my element. Yours too. I can't imagine it. But I suspend my disbelief and I say, wow, imagine that. Before there was time, there was something. And after it's all over, there will be something. And whatever that thing is, that's eternal. And that's what I mean when I say God. You are one. None other can compare or consort with you. There's just one. You are without beginning, without end. I mean, wow, forever. To you belong power and dominion, because you're all there is, really. Everything else comes and goes. But there's something in the universe that is forever, and we are related to that something just by being created. Now, if I've suspended my disbelief, I'm thinking to myself, there's something eternal about me. I'm connected to that God. And indeed, when Atana Tokef ends that way and says, we are made in your image. You gave part of yourself to us. Now you have a concept of humanity that is magnificent. We are partly like God, even though we will live and die. But there's something eternal about us. We call that our soul. Do you believe in a soul? Do I believe in a soul? Depends when you ask me. There are times when I say I have no idea what a soul is. But there are times when I'm praying and I am sure I have one. Because at that moment I've suspended my disbelief and I'm committed to it's so obvious to me that I have something eternal in me. Now all of this is a God that's well beyond us, right? But now watch what makes this a great poem. Despite the fact that God is so eternal, I can hardly imagine that, way out there somewhere, eternal, I can't imagine that. Despite that, the poet now says, and you are my God, my living Redeemer, my rock in times of trouble and distress. You are my standard bearer, my refuge, my benefactor when I call on you. Suddenly, the play shifts. Scene 1, Act 1 of this play, God is eternal, God is just beyond, takes your breath away. Scene 2, like Hamlet's ghost, God appears. God is mine. I have a relationship with this God. And somehow, this God is with me. Now, do I always believe that? You know, when I was walking through town the other day, I didn't say, hey, God, come for a walk. Come on. God's not Harvey. Remember that play? Not the bunny rabbit, the invisible. I don't mean that. But now that I'm in services and we're singing this or reading it, if you know it, suddenly I do have a feeling that there is God. And that's what comes to me at moments of prayer. And we get now to the last line, and I'll show you how it all works for me, okay? Give you an example of finding my line that you may find yours. The last 2 lines, and if you look at the last paragraph in Hebrew, Biadoaf Kidruchi, can you see that? Yes. Right? Okay. I'm going to now do that prayer with you, that last paragraph. But you need a story. You have to enter now into my world and pretend you're with me in this version of the play being enacted. So I have a daughter, a magnificent daughter who's now 51 years old. She was born like so many daughters and sons with great promise. And at some point in her, just as she became a teenager, when she developed epilepsy. Now it turns out she probably already had it, but when she entered teenage years, it became evident. It wasn't so bad at first. She was having seizures every day, but they were just kind of staring seizures. And the doctor said, or rather the teachers thought she was just daydreaming. The doctor said, no, that's a kind of seizure. She's not falling over the way what's called grand mal seizures, not like that. But she would stare and not be absent for 10 seconds, once in a while, each day. And then it got worse and worse. She went to college, and in college, she started to fall and hurt herself. And eventually it was clear we had to do something. So we had tried every medicine in the book, but they didn't affect her. About 75% of people with epilepsy are controlled by medications, maybe 80, but 20% are not, and she was in that 20% category. So the medicines helped a little bit, but didn't help a lot. And finally they decided she had to have brain surgery. Well, you can imagine what it's like. Your daughter is having brain surgery. Some of you may have been there or similar. And it's not what you thought would ever happen to your child. She had several such brain surgeries. It never worked entirely. She stopped falling and hurting herself, thank God, but it also took away a lot of her cognitive capacity. So it was, she gained something, she lost something. If you ask her about it, she'll say it was worth every bit of it. She doesn't want to, always was afraid. Each day she'd be falling. Can't do like that. So she's quite happy now, and she lives a life. She's a dependent adult, but I've come to terms with the fact that that's her life. And I'm just grateful for her love, and as is her mother, brothers. So all right, with that in mind, the story now takes place, the scene opens. It's the first time that she's having brain surgery. She was been in college. She had studied Marxist thought. My little Marxist one year didn't want to come home for the Seder because we had hired someone to do the dishes, and she thought we were oppressing the proletariat. Next year, she's now in surgery. And she says to me, she's lying on a gurney. I'm sitting beside her. Her mother is there too, and holding her hand. And she says to me, Abba, says Daddy, say a prayer with me. What do I say? What prayer? Me, the expert at prayer, I should know, right? But who thought I'd be in a situation like this? And as I started to say some prayer, I said the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd. She said, no, I want a Jewish prayer. She'd heard it so often in the streets, on TV, she didn't know it was Jewish even. She wants a Jewish prayer. And then I remembered the last line of Adon Olam. Now we're going to do the last line. You'll see what it means. Let's read it first of all, because I've my own translation for it, but you'll get the idea. Into your hands I entrust my spirit. This is my God, right? When I sleep and when I wake, and with my spirit, my body also. Adonai is with me, and I shall not fear. So I knew that line. And I thought, that's what we'll sing. And she knew the melody, because we had gone to services enough. And so that became my line. Now, she's a Marxist. Does she believe this? Well, we sang it, she did. And so I'm holding her hand, and I sing to her. Biyado afkid ruchi b'yeti shan v'yayira b'im ruchi geviyati Adonai li v'lo ira. And I translate it from memory. I say, in God's hand I put my soul, and with my soul my body too. When I'm awake or when I sleep, God is with me. I need not fear. And we just sang that over and over again until she went into surgery. And you know what? To this day, she sings that line whenever she feels distressed, and I do too. Now, I want to tell you that it's not my prayer book, it's yours. It's not my diary, it's yours. The whole thing is a mishmash of poetry and God knows what. But when you go to services, if you suspend your disbelief and you don't say, I don't think God, I don't believe, suspend your disbelief and find a line. Just for today, that line. Or for this time in your life, depending on what's going on in your life. And you'll be amazed. You can read yourself into the story. It can be your line. You're one of the actors. You're one of the writers. You're now being part of the drama of the centuries. That's the Jewish drama that we call our prayer books. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. Thank you so much. That was amazing. I'm in tears. I don't know about anyone else. Wow, there was so much there to take in. I'd love to open the floor for questions. If anyone has any questions. Yes. Okay, great.
She'll give you the microphone, and then we'll all hear the question.
Is the Sephardic prayer book the same as the Ashkenazi, the Orthodox anyway?
Is the Sephardi prayer book the same as the Ashkenazi one? Basically, it is. All Jews in the Middle Ages inherited the same rabbinic tradition. Sephardi Jews had their own poetry. Ashkenazi Jews had different poetry. But at some point, they got together. At one point, the Ashkenazi authorities in Germany were being persecuted, and they moved to Spain, and they brought with them Ashkenazi customs. And so when they did that, the two of them combined. Now, when we say Sephardi, we mean people in Spain and Portugal and so on. There's also Sephardi Jews who come from the Arab lands, and they are a little bit different because they tend to have more Kabbalah, more mysticism, and their music is different. Sometime ask your cantor to explore the musical traditions of these communities, and you'll see from the music that the music is really different. But if you could find your way in one prayer book, you'll have no trouble finding it in the other. And if you know the Reform prayer book, you can also find your way in the Conservative and Orthodox one, actually, although it's harder in the Orthodox because there's so much extraneous poetry. But it's the same structure, same style. All Jews everywhere, you basically pray the same.
Oh, over here, Violetta.
I just wanted to say that when I saw this program advertised, the title itself didn't appeal to me a lot, perhaps because I was refraining my disbelief. And you have opened the pages of the prayer book so beautifully. And it's an amazing recount of the history of a prayer book and what it means to have a prayer book in front of us today. So I'm deeply grateful for enhancing that view, for allowing us to truly take ownership of every word in the prayer book.
Thank you very, very much. It means a lot to me, believe me.
Rabbi, I know you were very instrumental in writing books of explanation of the prayer books that we use in the Reform movement. I know you did one for the prayer books prior to the current ones. Are you planning to do one for Mishkan Tefillah and for the prayer books for the High Holy Days?
So the question is, I've written commentaries to past prayer books. Am I planning on doing one for Mishkan Tefillah? And the answer is, I'm afraid not. It's a large task. And I've been doing other things. Maybe somebody still will. In order to do it, you would need the minutes of the committee that took the old prayer books and wrote the new one. Let me be a little clearer about that. All prayer books are based on the traditional one. But we also have not just Jewish tradition, we have by now Reformed tradition. And so there are several Reformed prayer books before ours. The oldest one is from 1894, 1895, when the first Union prayer book came out. And I don't know that you ever used that, probably not here, because you didn't form your congregation yet. But that was edited, re-edited, revised, all the way till the 1940s. And then in the 1960s, Gates of Prayer got written, and that's probably what you used. And then now the current one is called Mishkan Tefillah. In each case, you have to go through the minutes of the people who made the changes and find out what they talked about, what they debated, and what changes were made. That material is all lodged now in the Hebrew Union College archives, American Jewish Archives. Somebody could spend a year and go through it all. It would be a fascinating study. And I had thought at first maybe I would do it, but it didn't happen, and I guess I won't now. Someone else will do it someday. It'll be a Ph.D. dissertation of some sort, and you just got to hang around long enough, you know. It's a trick.
He's got his third bar mitzvah coming up in January.
Third bar mitzvah, good for you.
So, there. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Any other questions? Yes. Okay. Come in. Sorry.
You talked about the difference between the Sephardic and the Ashkenazi prayer books. Is there the same similarity between the other Abrahamic religions, between a Christian prayer book or a Islamic
Christian prayer books and Jewish prayer books?
Yeah.
Christian prayer books and Jewish prayer books are wildly different. And that is because Christianity developed its own tradition and its own theology and so on. Now, both Jews and Christians use the Bible. Their Bible, however, is larger than ours because they also have what they call the New Testament. And mostly what they have in their prayers are the New Testament stuff. We don't have that. That's the story of Jesus and so on and so forth. We share things like the Psalms. So some of their prayers are Psalms, and we say the same, not necessarily the same Psalms, but when they read a Psalm, I understand that, I get it. Now, there are other similarities also. If you really know, someday invite me back, I'll tell you more. But take their Easter service, all right? Or take even their basic Sunday service, in which, you know, they have this thing called the Mass or the Eucharist, where they offer the bread and the wine. You sort of know about that, maybe. That's based upon their understanding of the Passover Seder. And so the Passover, their Easter was once called Pascha. That's the Aramaic word. You can hear it sounds like Pesach, right? Pesach, Pascha. And later, Easter was a medieval term that came into being. So many of the customs that they have Jewish origins. And you can understand what Christians are doing if you know more about the Jewish bases for them. Similarly, in the Middle Ages, when they were the majority and we were the minority, we borrowed some things from Christians. Now, we didn't actually, we didn't borrow them with Christ in them, you know what I mean? But just some of the customs that they had, we began to borrow because that's just the way you did things. Reformed temples got started in Germany in the 19th century, and those who could afford large synagogues, I mean, think of, there are not a lot of good examples in Canada, but Holy Blossom. How many people know Holy Blossom? Holy Blossom Sanctuary You know, it's massive, it's huge, it's right. And originally the rabbi was way up high and there was a choir and organ and everything. That's based on the fact that that's how Christians prayed in the 19th century. And Jews wanted to make their worship sort of Western and modern, right? So that people would look and say, oh, I see, you do what we do, very nice. We were trying, in other words, to culturally do the same thing that they were doing. So we have regularly borrowed from one another and copied one another because we live together in the same cultural environment. But their service is different. And their service developed, think of it, here's the Hebrew Bible, our Tanakh, our Bible. Then just when the rabbis were developing Jewish tradition, Christians were developing Christian tradition. And we shared with one another. Early Christians thought they were Jews. They thought we were just Jews who believed in Jesus. And eventually, they took over the Roman Empire. Then they became the majority, and then they developed their own tradition, and it was in Latin and Greek. We kept Hebrew, and we went in a different direction. But whenever we got together, we are actually brothers and sisters. Really, we are, historically speaking. So, you know, I have been to Christian worship. I have been at Christian worship where they asked me to take part. You know, I'm a rabbi, and they say, would you like to read a psalm, perhaps? And I say, I'll do that. You know, I won't read the New Testament, but I'll read a psalm. And they know that. And sometimes a priest will come and will want to participate, and we might say, well, why don't you read this psalm for the end of services or something like that.
Thank you. Final question. Okay, the Matises. Here we go.
I'm just wondering if there's any cross-cultural similarity then between Jews and Muslims.
Is there
well, you know,
yeah.
similar. The way
Same kind of question. Is there cross-cultural similarity in Jews and Muslims? There is. Once again, it's the same kind of thing with Christians. Islam comes into being in the 7th century, and it starts in the Arabian Peninsula. And those who have studied Muhammad and the early Islam have found parallels between the earliest Islamic religion and Judaism. But once again, they're not very many, there are few, but they are there. By the 7th century, however, most Jews didn't live there, and Jewish tradition had changed dramatically. So there are not a lot of similarities. Once Jews and Muslims begin living together, side by side, just like the Jews and Christians, then, of course, there's cross-cultural sharing a little bit. I'll give you an example. Maimonides, and this is a far-out example, but it's true. Maimonides lived in Egypt. He came from Spain, and because of some persecution, he moved to Egypt, and that's where he made his name. He was a physician in Egypt and also a businessman. He had a shipping company, actually, and his brother, I think, ran the business. I can't remember exactly, but he was a businessman and a rabbi and the head of the community in Spain. And he wrote letters to Jews all over the Muslim world talking about, you know, answering questions about Jewish law. He wrote a legal code. He wrote his famous philosophy. I mean, he's one of the great minds of our time. So he was in charge of the community in Spain, in Egypt, and his son, Abraham, wrote about his father. And he says his father wanted Jews to take off their shoes before they came into the synagogue. Where do you get that idea, right? Muslims are taking off their shoes. We should walk in like shoes? I mean, gee, right? That's exactly how Reformed Jews were reasoning in the 19th century. You know, Reformed Jews in the 19th century said, we want to have grand music, great music. We want choirs, organ. That's because they saw that in churches. And they said, well, you know, we could do that. There's nothing wrong with that, nothing un-Jewish about it. Maimonides had the same thing. Maimonides also wanted to get rid of the silent Amidah. Why? Because he said it's too noisy, it's cacophonous, everybody's davening up a storm. He didn't say use the word daven, but you know, it's noisy. And he says it's embarrassing. People walk by and they think, what is this barnyard stuff? We should just have the chazan sing it, and people will say amen at the end of each sentence. It's exactly what Reform Jews were saying in the 19th century. We want our worship to be modern and nice. So that kind of sharing takes place back and forth as well. But their service is wildly different, completely different.
Okay, final question.
Yeah, thank you very much for a very interesting talk. I was thinking about your comments about Hamlet and Shakespeare and how...
Start again, please. I didn't understand.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for your talk. I was thinking about your remarks about Shakespeare and Hamlet and the contemporary productions of Shakespeare that change everything and leave a plot line, and it's still called Shakespeare. And I'm wondering, in terms of the prayer book, if there's prayers that are sacred and immutable, or everything like Shakespeare could be changed as long as you have just a simple plot line.
I'm still not sure you're asking me if
there's parts of the prayer book that have to be there.
Have to be there.
It's
God,
not
that's
just
a good
poetry.
Question. That's a great final answer. Question. I'm about to give you the final answer for now. Clearly, some parts of the service this is obviously a wonderful answer. It's being, it's being accompanied by music even. Some parts of the service, I think, it's a subjective thing. There's no objective thing. It's not like somewhere God wrote down these 5 things thou must sayest, So it's how each generation feels about it. And generations feel differently. But we've now had 200 years of reform, really. And so we can see at least 200 years how people have felt. So I can't imagine getting rid of the Shema, right? I can't imagine getting rid of the Torah reading. I can't imagine getting rid of altogether some kind of private prayer, which is what the Amidah is. So I can go through and make some suggestions. Do I think we need every single one of those Amidah blessings? No. Do I think we need it in exactly the same words? That's the critical question. If you go back to the earliest time, you see that the purpose of prayer was to be creative. The reason we have those words there is largely because the printer put them there in the 16th century. But until then, there were differences, lots of changes. At the turn of the 20th century, we discovered a cache of documents in Egypt, and we called them the Geniza. All of a sudden, we saw manuscripts that showed you how Jews prayed in Egypt and in Eretz Israel. Our prayer book, I didn't tell you this, our prayer book was written in Babylonia, which is Iraq. We are basically Iraqi Jews in terms of using our Siddur. Palestinians, people in Eretz Israel, they didn't have their own prayer book yet, and they still had lots of differences. So we see that this is what came down to us out of the prayer book that was written in Iraq, coming, of course, from the first century. And here's Iraq. They write a prayer book. We inherited. Coming from the same time in the first century, over here in Egypt and in Eretz Israel, they're doing some different things. Lots of it is the same, but some of the things are different. And so we now see that there was lots of creativity. When we wrote our modern prayer books, our Reformed prayer books, sometimes we use Eretz Yisrael versions of the prayer, not the versions that we had been using in our Orthodox tradition that came from Iraq. I'll just give you one example. We want a prayer for healing. Now we have Debbie Friedman's song and Yamisha Beirach, right? But before we were doing that, and still today, we have a prayer in the Amida, the Shemon Esrei, that asks for healing. The last line of that prayer from the Babylonian original prayer book is, Baruch atah Adonai rofei cholei amo Yisrael. Blessed are you, O God, who heals the sick of the people of Israel. Well, when Reformed Jews back in the 1800s saw that, they decided they wanted to pray for everybody, not just for Jews. Why should we not pray that other people get better, right? They discovered that in Eretz Yisrael at the same time in the 9th, 10th century, 8th century, Jews were saying, Baruch atah Adonai rofei hacholim. Blessed are you who heals the sick, period. So we took that, put that in, and we dropped the more particularistic version that we had been using in our Orthodox Ashkenazi tradition for like forever. So I would say certain parts of the service seem to be pretty sacrosanct. The structure seems to be pretty sacrosanct. But we don't always have the same words, and we regularly feel free to change it. We are not just the actors in this eternal play of the Jewish people. We're the directors. We're the producers. We're even the critics. Because after service, you decide you didn't like this and you did like that. So we play all those roles. When COVID hit, we suddenly realized you had to do the whole thing in an hour. Who's going to sit online watching it more than an hour? So people said to me, what shall we do? I said, get rid of half of it. Decide what's really important. What do you want to do this Shabbat? Rosh Hashanah came. You can't do the whole Rosh Hashanah service. Who's going to sit there for all of that? What's the message of Rosh Hashanah? That's what you'll do this year. So we've learned that we have to be intelligent about how we use it. And yes, some things are more important than others. It's a subjective determination, and it varies depending upon the circumstances in which we live. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you again so much for coming. It is such a wonderful pleasure to have you. And thanks everyone for being here. If you want to keep the conversation going, you can always come talk to me about services. Shavua Tov.